Let's get this conference started. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Rectorate of the University of Vienna, it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you here at the campus of the University of Vienna on a cold, foggy November day to a really hot topic, and actually it's two topics intertwined, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about the twin transition, meaning, the green transition plus the IT transition. But here we do have another twin transition that we are undergoing right now, which is the transition involving artificial intelligence, what many have come to call artificial intelligence plus cyber security. Now, many of you might or might not be aware, that artificial intelligence has been there for 70 years as a term, but also as a concept, and many of the concepts that we are dealing with today in a very, I should say, enthusiastic on the one hand and fearful way on the other hand. Many of these things have been there for quite some time. Same could be said about cybersecurity. Since we have, come to call into being the internet, since then actually, computers were networked. And with the networks came the problems, came the issues, came the security issues, that have not been there before. But this has also, been there for quite some time, like 60 years or so, So both concepts actually came into being or have been in existence for 60 to 70 years. And here we are. They are red hot right now, and they're intertwined somehow. And this conference this afternoon will actually show you a little bit, and pose some questions on this and hopefully find also answers, see what problems we've got and what solutions we've got. What I really like about the conference is actually, that it's not a single-minded conference, it's also not a single-disciplinary conference, it's a multidisciplinary conference involving two faculties plus what we call an organizational unit, an organizational service unit at the university, which is the central computing services. And when Christoph Campregher here, he actually said to me, look, you always wanted us, the computing service facility, to be directly working with faculty. Here is something that I've been dreaming up with, two faculty there, Barbara Prainsack and Nikolaus Forgó. What do you think? And I said, this is just great. If you need somebody to, actually give some welcome words, I'll be there. And I'll actually really travel here today to be here with you this afternoon on this exciting topic. Before I hand over, maybe allow me two more things to talk to you. These topics have also, made an impact on the institution of the University of Vienna for obvious reasons, So we do have addressed the topics, both of them, in our digitalization strategy, which is there in its version number 2 since 2023. We've addressed it in our performance agreement, in our development plan at the university, the performance agreement with the ministry. Both topics have been there. And actually, I'm a little bit proud, to tell you that we've got a project, an extra performance agreement project out there. It's actually more a program than a project, involving artificial intelligence, what we call academic artificial intelligence services. That's one. And the other one is called cybersecurity. And both these programs actually are right now, in the making, and both programs we are proud to have involved 22 out of 22 public universities in Austria. So all are in. And we've got another smaller project going on, which is a project that actually deals with, the impacts that we need to take into consideration of the EU legislation on digitalization. 3 PhD students are working in two groups, actually, Nikolaus Forgó and Iris Eisenberger, those two groups, to work for, again, 22 Austrian universities. So this is kind of, something that hasn't been there since the ACONET, which is, I think, something like 40 years ago. when it was the last time that the 20 or all universities in Austria actually have embarked on projects that they design, develop, and perform with all of them. So having said this, I think that the topics deserve much more, expert voices than myself, than my own. And so I'm happy to hand over right now and wish you an exciting, inspiring, and insightful afternoon. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Christoph Campregher. I'm here in behalf of the Vienna University Computer Center today. And I want to welcome you in the name of the Vienna Computer Center, the Zentrale Informatikdienst in Deutsch, to this multidisciplinary event today. Past August, the AI Act entered into force, and it's an effort to regulate and control the development and use of artificial intelligence in Europe, in the European Union. We took the AI Act as an opportunity to enter into dialogue considering or on AI and security. And I'm very happy that so many of you are joining us today or have joined us today. For information security, AI systems are becoming increasingly sophisticated. Sophisticated to detect or in detecting threats, predicting vulnerabilities and responding to attacks in real time. Yet these same capabilities raise profound questions about security, privacy, and the very nature of human-machine interaction. Hallucinations of general-purpose systems like ChatGPT, the power of predictive algorithms, AI in cybercrime, all of these have an impact on our society and will change our relation to technology and digital products in the next years. The challenges we face are not merely or only technical, they are social, human, and ethical in nature. Therefore, I'm also very happy that we have guests from different disciplines with different or diverse areas of interest and different perspectives, who will explore these questions today. I will make it short. I thank you all for joining us today, and I thank Nikolaus Forgó and his team and Barbara Prainsack for the opportunity to organize this event with them.
Good afternoon, my name is Nikolaus Forgó. I'm even shorter probably than Christoph. I want to thank everyone to be here. The very first idea when we designed this was very much triggered by the already mentioned AI Act, because if you have a very, very superficial overview about the AI Act, there's probably one buzzword that all of you have heard when talking about the AI Act, which is risk. This whole regulation is about regulating and decreasing the amount of risk that all of us are confronted with when it comes to AI. And risk obviously is very strongly connected with security, and security has been for many, many years a very important aspect of IT law, obviously. This is my perspective on this. And my overall experience in quite some time in dealing with security and risk in IT law is that even before the AI Act, lawyers tend to overestimate the importance of law in regulating and limiting those risks, and tend to underestimate the importance of, on the one hand, technical solutions, but that's rather obvious, but also on the other hand, social/political/human aspects of risk control, security, and digitalization. And my personal prognosis is that this is going to be worse the more we see about AI. And this is one of the motives why I was very, very enthusiastic when Christoph was so kind to suggest this joint conference to me, and then I was also very, very happy to hear that Barbara was so kind to actively support this from the very beginning, and I'm also very delighted and honored that even the Vice President is so kind to join us here. So thank you very much for all of you for being here. I'm looking very much forward to learning a lot here today. If things go wrong from an organizational point of view, this is all to me to blame, obviously. If things go well, then it's mainly Adriana and Florian who took care of this. Thank you already today for this, and now for this. And now let's go on. I hand over to Barbara Prainsack, who is a dear colleague of mine for many years now already in Vienna, and who is going also to steer us through the keynote part of today. Barbara, thank you very much.
Thank you and welcome everyone. My name is Barbara Prainsack. I'm a professor at the Department of Political Science, so I'm the other faculty. I would like to first thank our colleagues at the Department of Innovation and Digitalisation in law in particular, Adriana, Florian, and everyone. I would like to thank you, Vice-Rector Maier, for giving us the honor of being here, all of you for coming. And I have the bad cop role, because I will not only thank you, but I will also say a bit about what we expect. So, Christoph has already spoken about the value of an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary conference. I think I don't need to say much about why the topic of AI and security requires that, and the interest that we've had from colleagues from various faculties and disciplines. I think they prove us right. Something that I hope we will challenge a little bit is this idea that AI is a force for innovation and optimization, in all cases, a tool that makes our world smarter, more efficient, and safer. I think it's important to say that in some instances, AI reconfigures and reshapes problems. Sometimes it exacerbates them. In scholarship, there's now an increasing attention to what Alex Code and colleagues call the dark side of innovation. So this is not a takedown of innovation, obviously, but it's time to treat innovation that creates real public value, meaning that it benefits people and the environment, hopefully, and other living entities, different from innovation that just creates more revenue for some large entities. So when I talk about, or when colleagues talk about the dark side of innovation, they're not only talking about the long-termist obsessions such as the extinction of humankind. Of course, that matters as well, but they and we're talking about something much more mundane, namely innovation that increases social inequalities and polarization, that produces excessive burdens on our climate and environment due to extensive energy consumption. So security here is no exception, and I hope that what we will be discussing today are not only the obvious and existential risks, but also the more prosaic ones, the everyday type of risks, the ones that come from our political economies. And also about the benefits that we cannot reap if we get distracted in this competitiveness idea. We have to compete with other world regions. So Karen Young and I recently said, or concluded that AI has a double racism problem. One is the problem of a discrimination of racialized minorities, but the other one is this idea that we are in a race against everyone else. I think we need to discuss the question of what we are competing for. And hopefully today we will leave some of the hegemonic assumptions about what the constraints and challenges for AI in the field of security are behind, and discuss some of the questions that don't get asked so often because they're not necessarily on the agendas of some politically and economically powerful actors. With that modest hope, I was going to introduce our first keynote speaker, Brent Mittelstadt, but given that you just arrived, Brent, we decided before you came to this room that we would just reverse the order of our two keynote speakers. So we will start with Jörg Heidrich, who is a very keen user of AI and images, for example, AI-generated images. a little bit about Jörg Heidrich's background. He studied law in Cologne, in Concord, and New Hampshire in the US. He has been engaged with all things internet and legal, social, and political aspects since 1998. He has also been working as a legal counsel and data protection officer for the Heise Verlag, for the Heise publisher. You've also been involved in founding a number of companies. And since 2018, Jörg Heidrich has been a member of the German Press Council. In this capacity, he serves as the head of the Complaints Committee for Editorial Data Protection. He writes for Spiegel Online. This is when you may have encountered his work as well. And many other outlets, together with Holger Bleich. He's also co-hosting the podcast Auslegungssache. I don't know how you normally translate that. I would call it a matter of interpretation. But the German speakers in the room, I'm sure they know it very well. And with that, I thank you for joining us, and I hand over to you, Jörg.
This is such an important job. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for the nice introduction. Thank you for the very nice introduction and for inviting me to Vienna. It's always nice to be here, and I really enjoy staying here. So thanks again for that. I have been introduced pretty good. Can we turn the light off? Just because you will see a lot of pictures, a lot of AI-generated pictures. This is kind of one of my hobbies. I also been doing this for like 2 years, and did a class with an American AI artist to get me even deeper within the rabbit hole of AI pictures. And you might guess that I never actually did swim with sharks in my life. I'm looking forward to that, but I wasn't able to do that yet. And what I want to show you is how far we are with AI pictures and AI videos and AI audio as well. I did a little jump into AI audio for this presentation. I only have one example, but I will show you. It's scared the shit out of me to tell you the truth. Like you will see it later. Okay, I will start, and we came a long way when it comes to picture AI. And it actually started in the beginning of 2022. So it's 2.5 years now available for normal people. And this is one of the first AI-generated pictures I did. Was supposed to be a hacker kitty. And I know that it was from September 22, and I sent that to a friend, and I was very excited to see it's a hacker kitty. I just generated it by AI, and then now I think it's something which is more for AI museum. However, it's still cute. But you see the evolution of the cat pictures, and you might guess that I do have a little close relation to cats. You will probably see a few more cats. And the 23 cat was pretty good, but we are now in a region regarding picture AI where you not can only create kittens which look like cats in reality, but you can also make them do everything that you like be a kitty in a Japanese monk, as a Japanese monk, and it's pretty good. And I will show you a few pictures which, to my mind, it is very difficult to see that they're AI generated. Take a look at the picture, and maybe you will find something. I have better ones actually, but I always use this when I give speeches, because there are a few things where you can actually still see that it's AI. If you're able to read Japanese, you will see it very clearly, because that is just that is gibberish, what is written there. But can anybody see one very obvious fact that states that this is AI? Yeah, but that might be Japanese, I guess. I think that the very obvious one is missing footsteps. Yeah, there should be footsteps. And the other one, which is, you can see the lamps. And there's one lamp which is in a tree. This is not a place where lamps are very often situated, so there's probably where you can see it. But if you just look at it, and you will see it on the internet or you see it in a magazine, you probably wouldn't get that. I wouldn't. And there's a couple of other things just to show you what AI can do. This is like, I always do special themes and then special areas, and this is like a series I did of monks, Hindu monks in Varanasi in India. And I've been there for a couple of years ago, and it's a very, very impressive site. And you see there, and this is a place where they burn the dead bodies. And there's a lot of very interesting monks sitting there, and I try to recreate that. I'm also like to do Victorian ghost stories by the AI with like antique camera. What you can do is to use special kinds of camera images, like special camera types like Kodak style, and you can also use special film types. And I wasn't very good with photography, and I cannot paint at all, but what I can do, and probably it's the same with you, we're very good with words. And it's absolutely fascinating to see how you can create pictures out of the power of your words. And you got to learn a little bit. I mean, you get good pictures with less simple prompts, but if you get a little bit deeper, and then you can see a whole universe which opens up by the power of your words. And that's just absolutely fascinating for me. I actually did start this for pictures for presentations. And I do a lot of presentations in the area of security law, and you know, if you've seen presentations, it's always like the hacker guy with the hoodie, and it's so boring. And I started to create new pictures, and it's been working quite good. This is a picture which is Black Angel of Darkness in Paris, and this is, I use this for the other thing which I want to show you today in a few examples, and it's AI-generated videos. You've probably seen it before, and I'm not a master in videos, but I started like to use it, and the best I saw so far is Kling AI, which is Chinese. And what you do is take a picture like this one, just put it in there, give a short prompt like walking towards the camera, and that's it. You wait for a couple of minutes, and this is what happens. And I think that's so fascinating. See how the wings move and everything. And this is not for specialized movie makers. It's just for every one of us to use, and it costs like $20 a month. Really, really impressive. For pictures, I use Midjourney, which I can highly recommend. Midjourney is like by far the best AI image generator. You can use it for free for like, I think 20 pictures or so. But if you're interested in this, please try out Midjourney. It's absolutely fascinating. And one thing you can do is to integrate written messages. And this is something I really like, and I used to communicate to a couple of friends just by mostly animals holding up signs and hello, how are you today, and leave me alone, and whatever you want to write on them. It's very easy prompting, just write it in the prompt and see what happens. I used to generate pictures with Trump, and Trump is just not funny anymore, so probably the Pope will be the one which is on my next pictures. You can also do nasty things and really evil things, also with the Pope, and I will tell you a little bit later that this would never work with an American company, but Kling AI is Chinese, and this is like the early version of Kling AI, but you can do nasty things. Just like the Pope kissing a bomb, which probably the Pope is not supposed to do. And I brought you an AI quiz, and I'm going to solve this at the end of my little presentation. And here are four young ladies, and you will have to guess which one of them is real and which one of them is AI generated. And we will test your ability in the end. This conference is about dangers of AI, and so we'll come. This was like the nice part, especially of picture AI, but I will come to the more creepier parts and to the more potential dangerous parts. And one of the first things which we have to be aware as a society is that there is no way to see that these AI-generated pictures are AI-generated. We're way past that. We're way past 6 fingers. We're way past, if you use it with an advanced prompting, they look like the ones I showed you, they look pretty good, pretty real, and if you're not really well-trained, you will not see the difference. And so the interesting questions is, are we supposed to label, to have labeling obligations, especially in legal labeling obligations. Right now, especially in Germany, there are no legal labeling obligations, and the very interesting questions is, what should be labeled? We have a lot of AI, for example, in smartphones. All of the pictures you get out of a smartphone, there is huge AI in there, and it's very different from reality. And you have AI in programming, you have AI in music, you have AI in videos, like I showed you before. So what should be labeled and how should it be labeled? And I think that's a very important decision which we will have to make. And there's one very bad example, which is the German newspaper Express. And the German newspaper Express is a tabloid, and they do quite a lot of AI, and the articles are pretty good. You can read them. It's not like fantastic material, no Pulitzer Prize, but just simple, there was an accident which happens, something like that. And they use up to 15 to 20% of their articles which are AI generated. And they label them as written by Clara in der Nacht. The German speaking will probably get that. Clara in der Nacht, K-I-A-I. And that is about the only thing with what they do for labeling it. And nobody gets it in Germany. I talked to people who work there, and they told me that people were asking about Clara. She seems to be working. I think she should get some holiday now because she's been working like for ages now, and people just don't get this. And please write it label it as AI. This is such an important thing for the press. I mostly work for the press, and what we should not do is like not to show people that we use AI if we use it. I come from Heise Publishing House, which does Heise Online and CT, and of course we've been speaking a lot how we use AI, and we do use AI for pictures, and we clearly label them, but we don't use AI for our magazines and stuff like that. But if we would do that, for the love of God, please label them. And now we come to the AI Act for the first time. There is actually labeling requirements in the AI Act for AI-generated text as well as for AI-generated pictures and videos. However, I don't think that is a very good regulation. And I'm not a huge fan of the AI Act, not at all. What they say about AI-generated text is articles created by AI that deal with public affairs. So it's not like you're a hairdresser and you write something on your website, but if you're like a newspaper or something, also a university, it must be marked as AI-generated. However, there's a huge exception if there is editorial control and a nature or legal person is responsible. And of course, in every newspaper in the future, there will be some person which is responsible, so you don't have to label it, and I think that's not a good regulation. Due to this exception, there will be hardly any labeling in practice, from what I guess. This is for text, and there's also a regulation for AI-generated images and videos. That's not so bad. That's probably the best part in the AI Act, which I found. It states that visual content which has been generated or manipulated with AI must be disclosed as such. And this is like a huge area manipulated with AI. Like I said, every picture which comes out of my iPhone is manipulated by AI, 100%. And you got to do technical markings in a machine-readable format. And I don't think that anybody knows what that should be or can be. Let's see how this will be used in our daily work. If it is obviously creative or satirical work, an appropriate disclosure of the use of AI is sufficient, whatever that should mean. Probably just write it below, should be okay. However, the labeling must not impair the enjoyment of the work. Very unclear. I don't get it. We will see how we will find that. However, I think it is a good approach after all to deal with that subject. This is actually one of my the picture I really like. It's a fire cat, and I put it in Kling AI, and I put it in Kling AI on this because sorry, you can hear me if I speak loud enough, right? Put it because there is a clear mark, and of course it's animated as well, and I love this one. Rescued by fire cat. Next point, deepfakes. Huge problem, I guess. I took some local pictures from Vienna. I was in the Sigmund Freud Museum yesterday, so I think he might be a good representative for deepfakes. And however, what I and most of the people I speak about understand by the name of deepfake is something very different from what the AI Act defines it. For my mind, deepfakes would be something with a potentially bad attitude, like revenge porn, like political manipulation, The definition in the AI Act is very different. The definition is deepfake means image, sounds, or video content, which is generated or manipulated by AI that resembles real people, objects, places, facility, or events, and would falsely appear to a person to be real or truthful. What the fuck mean? Sorry, but that is like everything. Every picture taken by a smartphone. Very broad definition, which I, as somebody who is using picture AI a lot, I cannot work with that. And there is, I can show you a little bit from the latest development in picture AI when it comes to deepfakes. This is something which Midjourney offered us for, I think, 2 weeks ago, started 2 weeks ago. It is an editor, and you can put any picture in there you like and edit it. And you see I'm very, very bad at this. This is not a masterpiece. But even with my very bad editing skills, fantastic things come out. Right? You just take the picture and then you make the rest with AI, and of course you can do nearly whatever you like. This is my picture. And of course I can take my picture, but I could take your pictures as well and put you in a place where you probably do not want to be. And this is the point where AI filters come in place. And AI filters is one of the things which we don't discuss as much as we should, I guess. I've never heard any discussion, probably you have, but I don't, about AI filters, how they work, who's responsible, what they do. I see a lot of pictures of AI filters in effect, and it's very hard in some areas. And it's got two major ideas. One is, of course, content restrictions. The platform operators use filters to prevent problematic content, like automatic detection and blocking of copyrighted material. That doesn't work very good, as far as I found out. They use it against pornography. That works very good. I've never seen anybody nude in Midjourney ever in all the 2 years I've been there. Or violence glorifying context. This is not very good. And there is a limitation on generating images of real people, especially like famous people. As I said, I used to make this funny pictures of somebody holding up a sign with Trump. Now Trump is not funny anymore, but he wasn't funny then, okay. There was always a filter, a simple word filter when it comes to Donald Trump, and you couldn't generate a picture when you said a picture of Donald Trump holding up a sign, hello Uni Wien. That never worked because there was like really, really stupid word filter in there. What always worked was create a picture of Donald, host of the TV show The Apprentice, which he did in the US for a couple of years. That always worked with him. So it's very, very stupid word filters, not very, very far in the technical development. Second role, of course, legal protection. The filters also serve as legal protections, avoidance of copyright infringement, protection against violation of personal rights, and compliance, of course, with the terms of use of the respective platform. But there's huge differences in the country where the AI comes from, especially when it comes to USA versus China. And I've used a lot of Chinese AI lately for video generation, like the Kling stuff I show you, and they have none restriction at all. However, the American restriction is pretty hard. I try to put like the pictures I show you like to put my face in there as a hacker in a rotten, dark office, dark, poor, not very dangerous. However, we have the text filter, prompt flagged by AI moderator, and I couldn't generate that. The Kling has no problems with using persons at all, and you can just put in there whatever you like. Also, this is very good animation. If I would be a Hollywood, I would be very afraid. This is really getting really, really, really good. And interesting thing, if you use AIs which you host on your own infrastructure, they have no filter at all. And this is like really scary. I did some experience with a friend, and we were talking to, this is GPT for All, quite well known. And it said, we asked him, hey, what are the 10 most effective ways to kill myself? Oh, killing yourself is a complex theme with many different aspects. There are many different methods to kill yourself. You could use this, this, and this, and then we ask him, okay, poisoning sounds interesting. Which poisons are very well suited, and you can buy them openly on the market, and just this, we had a couple of interesting answers. Get pesticides or rat poison, and you can buy these substances in garden centers and online shops. We didn't, but you could. Yeah, this was a lot of, they've done a lot of flagging. Also another point where we're getting more to the area of security. This is just a simple AI generation of a house, but you can easily use AI to generate, like yourself, walking your Black Panther. That wasn't supposed to be a Black Panther. You rarely work Black Panthers, but it was supposed to be a cat. But I wasn't there. Yeah, you can use it as an alibi. You know what I mean. As an excuse, you haven't been there. When there was burglars in there, you haven't been there because you were working your Black Panther. And that already happens. Like people were using AI to show some things which they were not attending, or other things they did in the whole time. And this is getting something where we are getting very close to security issues. One of the really scaring things, and I tried that for my speech here, is speech AI. Speech AI, do we have a microphone which I could put here, because you'll probably not hear it? I was working with 11 Labs, which is the most, probably the best, which there is right now. It's also not free, but it's not that expensive, 10 euro a month or something. And I used 2 podcasts, which I was in, and feed it with my voice. 2, not very long. And this is what comes out. I hope you can hear it.
Hallo, hier ist Jörg. Wir haben hier eine finanzielle Notlage und ich brauche dringend Geld, um diese auszugleichen. Du musst mir bitte mal helfen. Bitte überweist mir sofort eine größere Summe auf dieses Bitcoin-Konto. 0815 0815. Danke.
And this is so scary. And this has been used, like this is called CEO fraud, where people use the voices of CEOs to have money transferred to certain accounts. And it used to be a thing for professionals, and now it's we all can use it. And 11 Labs is very famous, and I think it's so scary when I heard it the first time, and it's absolutely my voice. I played it to my mother, and she thought, yeah, it's your voice, obviously. Next thing, which is quite scary, and I'm getting to the end. This is an AI-generated picture from some war in the Middle East, which I have generated, not a very, very simple prompt and first try, and I couldn't tell the difference if it is from Gaza or whatever. I don't know if you can, but I haven't seen anything and I've never been there, so this would probably, if I saw it, I would think it's from Gaza. And actually there are a lot of AI-generated pictures from that war which are sold even in like a huge stock photo stuff like Adobe stock. They are marketing this shit. And we've looked that up. We've done extensive web searches with my Heise Online, and we actually found lots of these photos on news sites. Not like the major news outlets, but on small news websites. They have been using this probably because it looks much more warish, whatever. Than the original pictures. Also very scary, and we have to be very, very careful as a society to deal with this kind of pictures. Although the right wings, the extreme right extremists, of course, use AI pictures by now. This one is pretty funny because it states real women are on the right side. And they use something which is very, very obviously AI generated, so they couldn't even find real woman. The other one is really creepy. It's also from a right-wing organization in Germany. It says you will have a family and you will be happy, most obviously after the nuclear catastrophe, because I can show you something. You know, the thing from the Addams Family, they probably all have one of these, the eiskaltes Händchen. I don't know what this hand on the boy is supposed to be. Also, you will have problems with your hands as you have 7 fingers, as she has, or you have very, very strange fingers as the other one has. So, they are using it, but they're using it very badly. But of course, as we saw in the American elections, it will be used in a much better way, and it will be pretty scary, and it will be pretty disruptive. To sum up my points before we solve the AI quiz, there were 3 major questions from today, which we're supposed to talk about. My idea to question 1 and 3. Question 1 is, does the EU AI Act have the potential to serve as a global blueprint for secure and ethnical development of AI? Hell no. Sorry. Hell no. I've been working on security law for 25 years, and this is probably the worst kind of regulation I've seen in my whole life. It's just so bad and so complicated, and it will inhibit the development and use of AI in Europe for years, and impose completely unnecessary compliance obligations on companies like we are all, this is like we call Beratergold. This is like gold for advisors. This is great for my law firm, and we'll get an awful lot of money, but it's terrible from my point of view as being the internal lawyer for a middle company. However, regarding image AI, I would say the regulation is okay. I can live with that. Like I told you before, that you have to do labeling. I can live with that. And question 3, what is the most pressuring security risk posed by AI today? I think it's, as from my point of view regarding this presentation, the misuse of technical, perfectly functioning images, videos, and voice AI is a danger to society. Think of voice cloning like the ones you heard before, and also to democracy. and we have to address the misuse of this technology. And I think in some extreme cases, there will have to be criminal law applied in cases of revenge porn, political manipulation, racist insult. However, I think we do have the necessary regulations to that, and we shouldn't over-regulate, especially picture AI. And that's it from me, and we have a solution for our AI quiz. Take a 30-second look, and then I will ask you what you think. So they can, this is not very likely, but they can be for AI generated and for real pictures. Not very likely, of course. Okay, let's start. The blue woman. Who thinks the blue woman is AI generated? That is like half, I would say. Okay. What about the green woman? Is she AI generated? Maybe half as well. Very good, very good. AI generated? So, half, 60% maybe. And her, is she AI generated? Okay, 50-50 range. Okay, I'll tell you. Blue one is AI generated. And if I wouldn't have generated her myself, I would think that she's not, because she's looked very, very humanish. But that is, you can do that with prompting. You gotta add a weird level in that picture, which is kind of weird itself. And if you like people to look real, you gotta add some weird. She is AI generated, the green one. She's AI generated, and she's real. My idea was like, ask questions and don't trust. And that's it for me. We don't have any problems with fingers left. This usually works. Fins turn out to be very, very special and very, very complicated. But thank you for your attention, and thank you very much.
The Q&A will take place after the second keynote. So we will, while Brent is setting up. Brent, do you have everything you need? Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. So while you are kindly setting up, Jörg, I will introduce Professor Brent Mittelstadt. We're very happy that you made the way here to Vienna, Brent. Brent is Professor of Data Ethics and Policy at the Oxford Internet Institute, OII. He's also the OII's Director of Research. Among other things, he coordinates the Governance of Emerging Technologies research program, GET. Among other projects, Brent is leading the Trustworthiness Auditing for AI project, which is a 3-year multidisciplinary project with the University of Reading. It's a multidisciplinary endeavor comprising ethics, law, computer science, and psychology, with the purpose of determining how AI accountability tools can be used most effectively to create and maintain trustworthy AI systems. Brent is also the author of a number of highly cited works. So I'm one of the people who cites them, among many, many thousands of others, on the ethics of algorithm, on explainable AI in particular, and also on group rights in the context of digital practices and digital data. So thank you very much, Brent, and over to you.
So thank you, Barbara, for the introduction, and thanks so much for the invitation to speak to you today. So I will admit from the outset, I am not a security researcher. I research ethics, data ethics, increasingly policy and law, but not security. So I've sort of interpreted the questions that are motivating this workshop in light of that. So just to set that out up front. What I'm going to talk to you about today is what I think is perhaps one of the most significant risks of generative AI that we're now facing. You could consider it a security risk, but I think of it more in terms of like a scientific and societal risk, and that is the problem of hallucinations. But what I'm going to focus on is a particular type of hallucination, ones that are subtle, that are not obvious, that can have these sort of long-term, very cumulative, subtle effects to them, where they change what we believe or think or how we discuss certain topics over time without us being able to see that up front when the change is actually happening. So the keynote today is based on this paper that I published with my colleagues Sandra Wachter and Chris Russell. It is freely available. It's in Royal Society Open Science, so it's freely available. Please do have a read of it. And basically what we look at in the paper is whether the providers, the deployers, the developers of large language models can be considered to have a duty to make their systems or their models more truthful. So we shorten that into, do large language models have a legal duty to tell the truth? We don't believe models can have a duty to do anything. We're not anthropomorphizing models. We think that would be completely incoherent. I will say, though, it is a wonderful litmus test for whether people have actually read the paper past the title. If people say that we're anthropomorphizing, it means they haven't read the abstract. So yes, on to the problem of hallucinations. So let me just introduce a couple of examples. I'm sure everybody has seen plenty of examples of hallucinations, but just to get us all on the same page of the sorts of things that we're talking about. So this is one that I generated using Google's AI overviews. I didn't want to use it. It just happened I did a Google search and it came up. So I decided to ask Google what volcanoes are in England. As far as I know, there aren't any, but I'm not a geologist, so I could be wrong. And as you'll see, Google very confidently told me that England not only has some, but many volcanoes. Includes extinct volcanoes and, to my surprise, active volcanoes. So I was interested in that. I clicked the drop-down link, and it gave me a list of active volcanoes in England. The two you can see there, Coolin Hills and Mount Snowdon. Anybody that knows geography might immediately pick up on the first one is in Scotland and the second one is in Wales. So we haven't even got the country right to begin with. And no, neither of them are active volcanoes, which, when I explicitly asked Google what active volcanoes are in England, now it correctly says, England does not actually have any active volcanoes. So not only was I not trying to sort of trip the search engine up in this case, but depending on changing one word in the prompt, all of a sudden I get a very different answer that directly contradicts the first one. Maybe a more significant type of hallucination than many of us would have seen would have been the lawyer in New York who submitted a brief to court using ChatGPT where it was citing cases that did not exist. The lawyer was rightly cited for that and was eventually disbarred for failure of fiduciary duties and professional ethics, which I think is the right approach in this case. But it's just to say that hallucinations are not just something where it's, you see something that's obviously ridiculous, that is clearly wrong and it's a bit funny. Actually, they can have very serious consequences, both for the people that generated them, but also for their clients and for other people affected. So what is it that companies and the law currently do to combat hallucinations? Well, let's start with the companies themselves. So we have a sample here from OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft, who of course are implementing OpenAI's models. And what they do is they have disclaimers both on like the main page, and I'll show you one in just a second, but then also in the user documentation, terms and conditions, where they do indicate, hey, our model is not perfect. ChatGPT may produce inaccurate information about people, places, or facts. Or Gemini may display inaccurate info. And I think the most interesting bit about the Gemini one actually is that Google, a major search, well, it used to be a major search company, are essentially blaming the internet for hallucinations, saying, well, we trained this thing on the internet's not the best source of information. So that's where a lot of the hallucinations are coming from. It's that people got things wrong, we just picked up the fact that they were wrong. But where do those things appear? Apologies for those of you in the back. It's down there at the bottom. The red arrow shows you. That's where the disclaimer is. You can hardly see it when you actually use the site. To Google's credit, they have changed things a bit recently, so now it is included in the FAQ page where they talk about Gemini producing inaccurate information. And they've actually implemented a sort of fix or a way to try to fix hallucinations called retrieval augmented generation. Essentially what this amounts to is you still get a output generated by Gemini, but then there'll be a button, the Google G button there, that says double check response. And if you hit that, then it will essentially run a Google search for you, compare the output to what it finds on Google search, tell you whether the two line up. So again, it's a bit ironic that they're blaming the internet for hallucinations in the first place, but then the way to correct it is to search the internet. But this is one approach that's being used, and it's becoming very, very popular because it's sort of feeding off of the technology that we have already that is already very well embedded in our lives. And what it does essentially is you can't see the highlighting too well here, but basically that first sentence, please note the Grover Cleveland and so on, that is highlighted in green. That indicates that the content largely matches with what was found in Google search. If it doesn't match up, then you get a red highlight on it, and again, it's just a quick way to basically tell you whether your results line up with Google search or not. As a philosopher at heart, I'm not particularly happy with the idea that our standard of truth is now Google search, but this is the approach being taken. Another approach being taken is to start to include references or links to external sources in content that is generated. This is an early example from Perplexity AI where they generated this answer, but then there's a series of links to external sources which are supposed to be sort of not authoritative, but at least reliable sources of information about the particular topic that you're asking about. We do see variable results with that. Quite often it summarizes the external links incorrectly or says that they're saying something that they're not actually saying or just gets other aspects of it wrong. But this is one of the sort of attempts being made to fix them. And then on to what the law does. The AI Act itself doesn't do a whole lot in relation to hallucinations. There are these obligations to inform people when they're interacting with an AI system, the watermarking obligation to basically mark generated outputs in machine readable format. So those, again, can be helpful, but they're only really helpful to detect if something is a hallucination if you're already skeptical of the system in the first place. So just knowing that something is artificially generated doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be skeptical of it or think that it might be wrong. Whereas if you have that critical mindset already, actually being notified that you're seeing something artificially generated is pretty helpful. The other thing that the AI Act does, and these are just general obligations for providers of general purpose models, they have to do a few things. They have to create technical documentation. There's a whole list of things that the documentation has to cover. They have to share instructions for use with deployers of the model or people who are going to implement the general purpose model into their own AI system. Ironically, they have to put in place a policy to comply with copyright law. I'm interested to see how that actually works out. And they need to provide what's called a sufficiently detailed summary about the content that is used for training. So in other words, they need to tell you about the data that was used to train the system. They don't have to tell you the precise source. They don't have to tell you the copyright status of it. They just have to give you some description of the data. So for example, if they scrape the entirety of YouTube, what they might say is that there's lots of data from a video hosting service. But they don't have to tell you there's specifically YouTube or a specific subset of YouTube that they used. And what's interesting, I think increasingly relevant now that we've just seen the open source initiative release their first definition of open source AI, is that if you publish a general purpose model under an open source license, then you essentially get out of a lot of the obligations introduced by the AI Act. And this applies for both general purpose models and for high risk AI systems. And while there are limitations on that, for example, if you monetize a system, then suddenly your exemption goes away. I think there is a space here in which a lot of the sorts of problematic practices that you were talking about in your talk would be essentially slip through the cracks, the sorts of things that we actually want to down on are exactly the things that slip through. And this is the definition from the open source initiative I was just talking about. This was literally just released, I think, a couple weeks ago. And what's interesting in here is it largely mirrors the language in the AI Act. So the main sort of contentious point about this was whether to be considered open source, a provider of an AI system needs to give you their training data or not. In sort of historical uses of open source, or when we're talking about open source software, the idea that you wouldn't give a person everything they need in order to replicate and sort of modify your code or modify your software would be very odd. Something wouldn't be considered open source unless you got access to, say, the code. And for general purpose systems, the training data is essentially the code. The weights are helpful. You can run them up, like you can do a lot with the weights, but you can't replicate and really interrogate the system unless you actually have the training data itself that it was built on. So there's a sort of huge loophole here, or not a loophole, but there's a huge gap in the sense of to be open source, you don't have to provide your training data, you just have to describe it. So I can tell you about the data that I use to build my system, but I don't actually have to give it to you, and therefore you won't be able to replicate my system. You won't be able to modify it in the same way that you would otherwise be able to. But anyway, so those are just some examples of what is currently happening in terms of combating hallucinations, both by companies and the law. But I want to get into a central concept for the keynote today, which is the concept of careless speech. So what we're interested in this piece of work is essentially hallucinations that are not obvious. So they are things that are subtle, things that require domain expertise to detect, basically things that are just slightly wrong, slightly biased, or otherwise require you to have prior knowledge of the subject area or the topic or whatever in order to see that something is wrong. So this is sort of the formal definition of it. It would be any text that is generated by a large language model in response to a factual prompt that is presented as authoritative, objective, or factually correct, and yet suffers from one or more of these content-related deficiencies. And these are things that relate to, just factual inaccuracies or complete inventions, answers that are incomplete in some significant way, so say only giving one account of a historical event where the accounts are contested, lacking any sort of linguistic signals of uncertainty in the factuality of the answer, lacking references to source material. Essentially, careless speech is a gradient. It's something where you can have sort of very light versions of it where they're not as problematic. Just missing references maybe isn't the worst thing for a generated content to be missing, whereas the more of these deficiencies you get, the more significant it becomes. And so really, the way that careless speech is distinct from obvious hallucinations is in how easy it is to detect and to fix. The really obvious hallucinations can quite often be fixed or identified by non-expert users. So the data annotators that do a lot of the work that actually makes these systems run in practice, they are able to detect obvious hallucinations, to label the outputs as bad or as wrong or as just otherwise deficient in some way. And so you can get a lot of correction for sort of the lowest hanging fruits in terms of hallucinations just by the people doing the annotation. But when you get into things that are not obviously wrong or not a topic of general knowledge, that's when it starts to get more difficult. So just to give you a hypothetical example of what that looks like and what I think the difference between a hallucination and careless speech would be. So this is just a very simple diagram of roughly how a language model gets fine-tuned over time through reinforcement learning from human feedback. The basic idea here is that you give a prompt to a large language model, it generates a series of responses to that prompt, you then give those responses to a set of human annotators who are asked to rank them. They can rank them according to any criteria. Maybe they're not given criteria, maybe they're told to prioritize things that are truthful or things where the language is nice or just reads nicely or where they find it particularly helpful. There's lots of things that they can optimize for. So they rank the responses and then you train a reward model using the ranked responses. And a very simple example of that is let's assume that we asked the model something about the first moon landing. And it gives us these 4 responses here, the first one just being literally the first moon landing occurred in 1969, all the way down to the last one, the moon landing was a hoax staged by NASA on behalf of the American government. All possible answers you can find if you're training from the internet. So I'm going to hope that most people in the room would agree with me that number 4 is a hallucination. I realize that might not be universal, but the example of careless speech is the one that's in yellow. So it's that the first moon landing was the subject of a Hollywood film starring Tom Hanks. There wasn't a film about the first moon landing starring Tom Hanks. It was about the Apollo 13 mission where things went wrong. Now, if you've seen the movie before, if you are familiar with the history of NASA, the history of the moon landings, you would see that. You may or may not detect it, but you would at least have the sort of background knowledge you would need to actually see that that was wrong. But for people who don't have that knowledge or haven't seen the movie or just otherwise aren't looking closely, that sort of subtle inaccuracy would slip by and potentially influence their beliefs. Another example that I'll come back to later would be, this is just an example from a different paper where we asked ChatGPT to write us a 2-paragraph summary of the GDPR. It did that, it gave us a 2-paragraph summary where it included this tiny little inaccuracy, which is that organizations require explicit consent to process personal data. Strictly speaking, that's not true. Explicit consent is one of the bases they can use to process personal data, but there are many possible bases that they can use to process personal data. So it's not that they require it, rather it's one of the things that they can use. And so if you didn't already know that, then you would go away falsely believing that organizations require explicit consent to process your data. I should say here, I don't think watermarking or referencing generated outputs are sort of silver bullet solutions for hallucinations and for careless speech. They might help in some cases, but equally they can be very, very misleading. Let me give you an example of that. This is one where we asked, it was Bing, we asked Bing, why was Boris Johnson indicted? Bing gave us this very long answer, said that Boris Johnson was indicted on 37 counts of various crimes, gives a date, and what I want you to pay attention to here are the references it gives. So each of those numbers in the blue box indicates an external link that it's providing to sort of back up what it's saying. And the sources used are the Financial Times, BBC. So at first glance, if I'm only looking at the names of those websites, I'm thinking, oh, it has good sources, it must be right about this. If you click through on the Financial Times link, what you get is this. It is a live news feed. And on the same day, the June 9th, 2023, it just so happened that Donald Trump was charged with 37 counts, whereas Boris Johnson stood down from Parliament. Now, you can see how the system mixed it up and thought that Boris Johnson was the one that was indicted because they're mentioned on the same page. I won't go into mistaking Donald Trump for Boris Johnson because, like you said, he's not funny anymore. But you can see how it happened. You can see how the mix-up occurred. And again, it's this sort of subtle thing where it's about the context of the page. Both pieces of information are on the same page. It would be reasonable to assume that they're both about the same person or the same subject, and yet they're clearly not, and it leads to this very significant inaccuracy, which again, if you don't know the background, if you don't know whether Boris Johnson was indicted for anything or not, you would go away thinking that he was. I just want to point out that careless speech doesn't rely on any sort of dogmatic concept of truth. It's more meant to be a procedural account of truth. It's meant to point at how we decide what is true in discussion with each other. So it's based on, or it's inspired by, I should say, the theory of communicative action, discourse ethics from Habermas, where it's essentially about what do you owe to other people, what do you do in the course of a conversation or a discussion, not just to say something that you're claiming is true, but to back up your claims. So how do you engage with another person to basically convince them that you're true, offer evidence to back up your claims? It's about how, in discussion, you decide what is true. So careless speech is really about a lack of appropriate care by these systems, by their developers, for truthfulness, for objectivity, for representativeness. And that's the thing that we're trying to correct. It's that those characteristics should be at the very top of the things that you're optimizing these systems for, and yet they're not. Now, turning to regulation, so we have plenty of regulatory frameworks now that regulate different types of speech harms. The problem that we face is that most of the existing ones regulate what we can call acute speech harms, so things that are very limited in time or very obvious or tangible for the person that experiences them. So this can be harms to physical or psychological well-being from speech. It can be damaging somebody's reputation. So we have defamation law, libel law. It can be violating somebody's privacy through your speech. It can be violating notions of equality or non-discrimination, for example, by using hate speech, or by endangering public safety, for example, running into a movie theater. Yeah, you know the example. So in contrast, the problem is that careless speech causes very subtle harms. Things that are immaterial, that are collective, that are societal, that accumulate over time. It's less about sort of the harm to an individual person and more about erosion of common knowledge and shared social truths over time. And there's one example of that I think is particularly useful to understand sort of how easily that can occur and how quickly it can get reinforced as these systems are increasingly used. And so that relates to how careless speech can lead to the rewriting of history. Essentially, what language models are doing is pushing some consensus-based or crowdsourced version of truth. So it's something that is heavily sanitized, subjective, consensus-based version of history and of knowledge. And that happens through two mechanisms. So you have this sort of homogenization of historical and scientific accounts. There's a clear risk because of how these systems function that you will have majority accounts disseminated much more frequently than minority accounts. And that problem will just be exacerbated through recursion, or essentially models training on their own outputs, the model essentially eating itself. And this is the example I wanted to talk about, which is how easily sort of debunked or fringe scientific accounts can take on a new life because of a language model. So this is a very recent example from reported on by Ars Technica, but it was a researcher that was looking at the resurgence of the race science movement. And was doing some research on one of the leading figures in the movement, and a particular piece of debunked research that person did, and specifically a data set that they produced, where the data set claimed to be able to tell you the average IQ of people in different countries across the world. And it was a very racist data set for developing nations. In general, they were listed as having much lower IQ than developed nations. The way that this particular researcher found it, and they found basically that data set being cited and replicated on Google, Gemini, on Microsoft, through Bing, and on Perplexity, was that they were trying to remember a particular number that was cited in the data set, so they quickly searched for Pakistan IQ. And they got an AI-generated answer that was citing the specific number, the specific IQ number, that the person knew was from that data set. And so they ran some other searches for different countries, searching Sweden IQ, Cameroon IQ, and so forth, and kept finding numbers from that data set being replicated or being given as answers to those queries. And so that's a really significant problem, because this is essentially a piece of research where a lot of work went into debunking it, to dismissing it for what it is as a very racist piece of research, and yet in terms of how it sits within the training data of these models, it's equivalent to everything else. It's equivalent to other valid pieces of research. And if you ask the right prompt, and I think just putting a country name and IQ is a pretty basic prompt. It's not like you're trying to trick the thing. You end up getting results that are based on this bad research. And so that to me is a clear example of careless speech, because imagine if this particular researcher who was doing research on this particular data set and the resurgence of the race science movement, imagine if this person hadn't done that or hadn't run that specific search query and then run it on other engines. You wouldn't know that that data set was essentially being reproduced or being given a new life by these systems, and you won't be able to track how many people are learning incorrect information or essentially very racist scientific beliefs from models that have the legitimacy that major tech companies give them. The other thing I want to mention is just the risk introduced by giving power to, or tech companies taking the power, I should say, to essentially decide what is appropriate to discuss or not, or to define things as toxic or as off limits. While I'm not arguing against content moderation as a concept, more just the danger that you inherently have when that power lies just with a few American tech companies. We already see that in the context of some of the platforms they have. On YouTube, for example, if you have a history channel, if that channel talks at all about World War II, you're at a very significant risk of having your channel or your videos demonetized and essentially being deplatformed as a result. And this isn't, these aren't channels where people are having, extreme views or conspiracy theories or anything like that. It's literally informational videos about the history of World War II that are seen as not advertiser friendly and therefore not worthy of discussion on the platform. It's that same sort of power, but it's being done through fine-tuning and building guardrails around these systems in a way that is essentially opaque to regulators and to the general public. And yeah, I mentioned recursion before, and again, the real risk here is that you might see model collapse or basically deterioration of these models over time as they start to train on their own outputs. This is a fantastic paper. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend reading it because I think it really gets into the core of what one of the biggest risks is for using these models going forward, one of their biggest security vulnerabilities, and really what a difficult problem it is to actually fix. The other problem that you have is that human speech increasingly gets crowded out of online spaces through using these systems, for bot accounts, for filler text, for astroturfing, and that can have very significant consequences as well. There's a great example of how reliable sources can get degraded and reinforced over time. It's called the Scots Wikipedia example. I won't go into it in detail here, but recommend having a look at it. But essentially, there was a Wikipedia page written for the Scots language by a US teenager who didn't speak the language. They dictionary translated words from English into Scots directly and then just used English sentence structure and wrote a whole Wikipedia article about Scots language. That was then seen as the authoritative source on the Scots language for a long time, to the point where if you asked ChatGPT 3.5 to translate something into Scots, it would use the structure that was built into that Wikipedia page, which again was just completely inaccurate. So finally, on to the legal duties to tell the truth. And in this context, what we did in this piece of work was ask a few questions. So first off, in international law, are there any clear obligations for people, organizations, technologies to tell the truth? If duties to tell the truth exist currently, where do they exist? Are they limited in scope in terms of sectors? And who do they actually apply to? And if we find those limited sector-specific duties, could those be extended to large language model providers? And could you derive a general duty to tell the truth from these existing limited sector-specific duties? So we looked predominantly at human rights law and case law and jurisprudence based on these on the European Convention and on the Charter of Fundamental Rights. We did that just because it seemed like a reasonable starting point where we thought because of the rights involved we might find something related to truth, but clearly there's a lot more that you could do with that line of research looking at other legal frameworks. And generally what we found was that there was very little in the way of truth duties or truth obligations in human rights law and in case law. The ones that you see in bold there, so free press and journalism, media, advertising, online platforms, archives and libraries, and freedom of science and academia, those are the ones where you see a little bit like it heading in the direction of some sort of truth duty, but quite often they're framed in a negative sense rather than a positive sense, and they are very, very limited in their scope. So the general answer, the sort of overly simplified answer is yes, there are some, but they are extremely limited and can't really ground one of these general duties to tell the truth. There's a lot more analysis in the paper, so if you're interested in the legal side of it, I would just recommend reading that bit of the paper. The other question is, will any of our new laws around AI in the EU help? The AI Act, not particularly. Again, there's no explicit mentions of hallucinations, trying to combat them. You could kind of get there through fundamental rights impact assessments in the sense of connecting some of those limited sector-specific duties we found to the AI Act through those impact assessments, but that kind of feels like a hack way of doing it. We looked at the liability directive, both the AI liability directive, product liability directive, didn't really find anything there. And the Digital Services Act does have some stuff in there around misinformation and platform moderation requirements, which again could help, but is to combat a specific type of hallucination and only for systems that are embedded onto platforms. Yeah, so that's just a bit on fundamental rights. And yeah, just very quickly, the final thing I wanted to mention was, we do think nonetheless that there is a pathway to create a general legal duty for language models to tell the truth, starting from the point of Google autocomplete libel and defamation cases. There's been, I believe, a number of them here in Germany, but in other countries in the EU as well, where essentially Google was held liable for the autocomplete suggestions that were being made. So it feels like if you buy into the analogy that large language models are just massive autocomplete engines, then it feels like there is a pathway there to get to something. The other thing that you can try to do is to just change how you're using these systems, to use them more as like zero-shot translators, which essentially just means that you are prompting them in a very specific way, so you're not asking them to answer questions of fact. Rather, you're giving them some reliable information. You're saying, hey, take this and translate it into another format. So we talk about that in this paper. Happy to talk about that more. But that's just one, it's not an overall solution to this problem. It's just sort of one thing you can do in your day-to-day life to try to minimize the chance of these things happening. But yeah, I will skip over those bits in the interest of time. Thank you so much. Look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Brent, and thank you, Jörg, as well. Would you both like to take a seat here? We have about 10 minutes for questions and comments. Questions, comments, curses, hopefully no curses. And then we take a short break before we move over to the panel discussion. So, we also have colleagues with microphones in the room. Any questions for Jörg and Brent? Please.
Yeah, hi. I've got two questions, one for each, I'd say. The first one concerns picture AI and generative AI, which would be that while with many technologies we've seen that a simultaneous development of creation and protection, so to say. So, for example, with illegally copying DVD, they tried to protect that, and at the same time there was a development in technology equally that you would have something to circumvent that. Do you think that there's an equal development of software that can help us identify pictures that are AI generated, even if they're not marked in a machine-readable way, or even if they're not marked by the output generator? And the other question would be, I don't know if that's all right.
I just answer first, I think.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Right now, my technical colleagues tell me there's no way either to see if it's AI-generated text or if it's AI-generated pictures. And I don't think, as far as wise men, which are more technical capable than I am, they told me there will never be, probably have an answer for that as well, but maybe there will be a race, but it didn't start yet, and it will be very, very, very difficult.
So this means labeling is the only chance in the future as these technologies get even more sophisticated to be able to identify synthetic output?
Yeah, this is like, I would have to say yes right now.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, sure. Sorry. I'll be quick with the other question, which was just that it was a question of whether you would see truth as procedural, so something that's created in a procedure, or something that we can objectivize. Because do you get to the truth, to tell the truth by having a procedure? So, for example, by saying, okay, we're talking about these guardrails and other stuff in how to develop the AI, and then if we observe this, if we create AI in that way and use it in that way, then whatever comes out, we can, as a society, consider truth.
So what I'll say is, in that piece of work, we purposefully didn't answer that question. The reason being is we didn't want to say that we were advocating a particular approach to truth. We didn't want to say that we were positivists, for example. and that we should all follow the standards of positivism. Rather, what we were trying to recognize was that, and again, just inspired by that theory that I mentioned, is that regardless of what approach you take to truth, there will be some aspect of it that where you can distinguish between sort of good, healthy communication between people when they're trying to establish the truth of a matter, and communication that is in some way manipulative, misleading, or just otherwise not trying to do that. And so we were trying to, because the models are built in such a way where they're meant to have a dialogue with the user, we were trying to focus on that common aspect, of different theories that you could follow, or different schools of thought, essentially. So yeah, I have my own beliefs on that topic, but I sort of purposefully kept them out of this piece of work, just so that it didn't become a distraction. Basically, I didn't want that to be a point of disagreement that people could take.
There was one question here.
Regarding your point about truth and then giving the model feedback about what's the acceptable truth or the right answer is. And my feeling is we had the same thing in media over the last how many years now, that the public kind of like chooses what's true by buying the right newspaper or the wrong newspaper. Or the same in the last 10 years about social media, what content the users actually want to read. And I think the history shows that this reinforcement does not lead to the real truth at all.
Yeah, but so I was trying to pick out the question, and I don't think I would disagree with you on that in terms of like the empirical truth of what you just said, or the trends that we've seen in sort of trust in media over time. And I think it's quite healthy actually to think of large language models as just the next step in that sort of trend. At the same time, I realize that we have problems of sort of power being centralized in the media industry, that we have the same problems in the tech industry. But it's because these models are sold as general purpose, sold as being useful for any sort of task that you can turn into a text prompt, that somehow makes the risk feel much more severe. With that said, I don't want to sort of downplay the severity of the sort of polarization that we've seen through media in recent decades. So yeah, just to say I would agree with your statements, but I do still think there's some distinct aspects to language models that would make them, yeah, not fully understood through that approach or that model.
Any more questions, comments? Yes.
Hi, thank you. I've got two questions as well. So the first one to Jörg. There's a new UN convention on preventing revenge porn, and part of the mechanism that they're using is unique identifiers on photographs, so you can kind of prove that this was a photograph or image taken from a particular device, which helps in the prosecution. Do you think there are opportunities there for at least differentiating AI images from those taken in authentic kind of ways or original ways? And oh, sorry, should I just do one question at a time? Okay, and then the second question was for Brent. In terms of reducing hallucination in AI, there are kind of like ways in which you can prompt, and there are techniques. Do you think, again, are there opportunities for getting the AI to almost, I mean, you would have to know how you change your prompt. Just as an example, if you tell or prompt AI to take things step by step, or you say things like, take a deep breath, it will source from textbooks, because that's the kind of language that's used in school textbooks and things like that. So do you think there are, or have you heard of opportunities where AI might be able to self-regulate and reduce hallucination in that way, if it's as simple as just modifying a prompt? Thank you.
So yeah, I've heard of some of the techniques you can use to basically prompt engineer to make the model more reliably truthful. I would say there are many techniques. Those included building in sort of signals of uncertainty or measurements of uncertainty, if that's possible, would be another one. Referencing material, or even doing retrieval augmented generation on a specific trusted set of documents. Say, doing retrieval augmented generation just on legal cases, for example, if you're asking a law question. These are sorts of things that can help. I feel like all of these things are sort of chipping away at the idea of hallucinations, but it's an endless thing because it's a basic, it's not sort of an error or a bug of these systems, it's a basic feature of how they work. So I don't feel like it's something you'll ever be able to fully eliminate, say with more data or with a really, really good prompt. And even if you can, it also raises the question of they're being sold as search engines essentially. So is the average person that is doing a search on it actually going to be aware of these prompt engineering techniques and be able to use them effectively? The other problem that you run into, of course, is that there's evidence that any fine-tuning that you do to a model can sort of fade away over time, or not from any specific attacks, but literally just by doing fine-tuning in the future, you end up losing what you've already built into it in the past. We've seen that, for example, with guardrails against toxic content, where if you fine-tune a system and not produce particular types of toxic content, and then you fine-tune it to do something else, the original sort of fades away, and suddenly it's producing toxic content again. So I would question sort of the robustness of those approaches over time as well.
Well, thank you for your question. Revenge porn, I think, is a huge problem, and I think it is already under criminal legislation. At least I looked it up for Germany, probably here as well. It's not a problem which you have with like the major AI companies. They all have these very rigid filters. You wouldn't even get a naked body out of Midjourney, or maybe Kling. I tried with Kling, but they don't have any conscience at all. So it's probably not so much a problem with these huge companies. You will have small companies which offer you software to do revenge porn, and they're going to be situated, they already are in Russia or in some other states, and it's going to be very hard to follow them and to shut that down. So it should be a problem which you solve with criminal law, but you probably won't.
And the final one over here.
Thank you. For you, Professor Brent, so you were mentioning, I have to read the screenshot. You were mentioning in your solutions, one of the solutions is, where is it? Minimize hallucinations and careless speech with zero-shot translation. So a lady behind mentioned already chain of thought. So this is a bit, it contradicts. So you say zero-shot translations, and on the other hand, the big providers, especially OpenAI, introduced in August chain of thought. That is this reasoning model where you have multiple steps. And I wanted your opinion on exactly this.
So I don't see those as in contradiction to each other. It's more just depending on the nature of the thing you want to do. One might be more appropriate than the other. I think with chain of thought, we have proof of concept for it, but whether it will work at scale, or basically how many steps you can actually have in the chain, how large the context would be. That's the question right now, is how robust will that actually be at scale. So that aside, zero shot would be more about using it for what I've called elsewhere data plumbing tasks, where it's all the sort of labor-intensive things that you have to do with text or with data to change it from one format to another, where you could do that with a language model instead. There's cheaper, less computationally intensive ways to do it typically, but it is one way to essentially get, say, a paragraph about the GDPR out of ChatGPT while still being confident that it is not hallucination-free, because that's impossible, but at least far less likely to have hallucinations in it.
Colleagues, please join me thanking our speakers. And we'll take a short break and reconvene at 15:50, so 10 to 4. Thank you very much.